Everyone's doing it, so I'm going to jump on board, and today I am knitting the Sophie Scarf. If you somehow haven't come across this pattern yet, it is from Petite Knit and it's absolutely everywhere. I've been highly influenced because I keep seeing people make it and they love making it, and also it looks super cute. So I've been thinking I absolutely have to make one. I recently did a roundup of all the things inspiring my knitting for 2025, and this scarf was the top of the list. I thought it'd be a fun, quick project to get me going knitting for the year. I'm going to use the official Sophie Scarf pattern from Petite Knit. I'm going to do a little pattern review, but I'm also going to time how long it takes to make the scarf because I've seen a few people online say it's really quick, but I want to put that to the test. So I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to the yarn store. I'm going to get some yarn and then I'm going to start knitting. I went to the yarn store in the city. I went to Morris & Sons, which is a favourite of mine if you're in Melbourne. I got 2 balls of yarn. I was finding it really tricky to choose between the different types of yarn they had and also what colour to choose. I ended up going with a superfine merino in a beautiful red colour, which I think is going to be perfect. I've seen so many people make theirs in red and it looks so good. And I also got this baby alpaca, which is so soft and lovely. It's a little bit more fuzzy. The red is a bit more smooth. So I thought it'd be nice to test the two out and see the difference between them. The Sophie Scarf pattern has some recommendations for what materials to use, but they're all cashmere, which is quite fancy. I did look at some of the cashmere at the store. They had the Cashmere Classic by Cardiff. It was so pretty and so soft and beautiful. I did think about getting it, but I thought, no, let's not do that today. But because cashmere is such a soft and lightweight yarn, the meterage to grams of the ball does differ slightly. So in the pattern, for example, they suggest the Cashmere Classic by Cardiff, and that's a 25 gram ball is 112 meters. Whereas this yarn I got, it's 8 ply as well, but a 50 gram ball is 125 meters. So I'm going more by the meters listed in the pattern rather than the grams of the ball, just because I don't have that nice, beautiful, lightweight cashmere. So this superfine merino in the red is beautiful. I absolutely love how soft it is. It has a really similar gauge to the pattern when worked up with 4mm needles. And like I was saying before, I have 125 meters of the red, but in the blue, this 50 gram ball only has 100 meters. So I thought the pattern has 2 different sizes in it, a small and a large. So why don't I make both? I can use the blue for the smaller pattern and then the red, because I've got more meterage in this one, I can use for the large. Also, I thought it'd be really fun to make both of them, so then I've got a comparison in the sizes, but I can also time both of them to see how long the small one takes versus how long the large one takes. Also, I like to double check the weight of these balls on my scale just so I can make sure I know exactly how much is on there. Especially good for a pattern like this where you might want to knit to the middle using exactly half the ball and then knit the other half knowing you'll have enough to get to the end. Also, the pattern calls for 3.5mm needles, but I've got some 4mm needles. I'm going to use these because my yarn actually suggests a 4mm needle and I don't want my scarf to be too tight. So I think these 4mm needles will be perfect. Also, I'm just using double pointed needles for now because I like working on shorter needles when I'm working, but I do have some circular ones I can switch to if the scarf gets too wide and I'm getting a little bit afraid it might fall off either edge. All right, so I've got everything I need. I think I'm going to start with the small blue scarf first. I'll time everything I do so you can know how long it takes, and I'm going to follow the pattern exactly. I won't make any modifications to it at all. So yeah, let's jump into it. So for this one, I'm doing a long tail cast on. I'm going to cast on quite tightly because I saw in the instructional videos on the Petite Knit website, this helps get a really nice edge to your work. So I've got my stitches cast on. I'm going to turn my work. One thing I want to note is that the tail of my yarn is on the right side, like at the start of the work for my odd rows. So every odd row, I'm going to know that that tail's here, and I think that's going to help me with my counting. And on the topic of counting, I think I'm just going to mark my rows down on a piece of paper. So I've been knitting for an hour and this is where we're at. I think it's starting to look pretty good. I'm really enjoying how quick it feels like it's going at the moment because the rows have been really short. So I feel like I'm constantly turning my needles and making good progress, which is great. Once it starts to get a bit wider towards the middle, obviously the rows will start taking a little bit longer, but at the moment I feel like I'm zooming along. I've done 10 rounds of increases so far, which is good. It's looking really nice. I'm liking how this yarn is working up. It's so beautiful and soft. I'm really enjoying using it. I like how the pattern is working up with the I-cord edging. I think that's really fun. It's just a nice little bit of detail. Also, in terms of the timing for this project, I want to give you an idea of how long it might take, but I don't know if I'm an average knit speed person. I think I might be a little bit on the slower side. So I will film myself in the next section knitting just in real time so you can get an idea of my speed and compare it to yours. If you're obviously a lot faster at knitting, this will take a lot less time to make. Also, I learnt when I was a kid and I only learnt English style. I've been thinking of making the switch to continental because it seems faster, and also I'm more of a crocheter and it does make sense to have the yarn in my left hand. But the thought of making a switch is a little bit daunting, especially with something that's so ingrained as my current style is. So if you've ever made the switch between English style and continental, let me know how it went, or if you've got any tips or tricks that might help me out with that. All right, I'm going to jump into hour 2 of knitting this one. But first, I'm going to do a couple rows and show you my speed so you can compare it to yours if you're making one as well. It's the next day and I finished up last night after doing 2 hours and then just called it because I was feeling very relaxed from all this knitting, and I think it's looking great. I'm really happy with how it's looking. This yarn, I wish you could feel it because it does feel so soft. Absolutely love it. The colour is perfect. I really couldn't be more happy with that either. In the second hour, I did 6, almost 7 rounds of the repeat of the increases. So it's getting quite long. I've still been counting my increases with the check marks. I do every second row, I'll mark 2 marks. And I find that's a really good system because you can go forwards and then backwards. And I always have this little tail end, which is on the side, which is closest to the start when I'm doing an odd row. So I know when I'm counting, if I ever get messed up, I always look for that and then I know what's going on. Also, I've just started using these stitch markers. Every time I do an increase, I use a stitch marker just in case. It's a little fail safe in case I somehow mess up my counting on this one. I've always got it marked here too. Because I'm doing the smaller size for this blue scarf, we should get to the middle sort of soonish, which will be fun because then I can start doing some decreases on the way down. So I'm going to jump back into it and come back in an hour. Very exciting news. I have just passed the 3-hour mark and serendipitously, I have reached exactly the halfway point of the scarf. I'm not quite sure what I'm more excited about, the fact I'm halfway through or the fact that it lined up so nicely with the 3-hour mark. Because I think it's kind of fun that I'm at the halfway point because I can assume that the entire thing will take 6 hours, but I'm going to give myself a little challenge and see if I can go a little bit quicker on the way down than I did on the way up. So it's all working out. The pattern's absolutely perfect. It's working out to a T. So now I've just got to go down the other side. But first, I'll just test that I've got the right amount of yarn to make it to the other side. I weighed this ball at the start and we're at 49 grams. So we'll see what it is now. It's at 23, which is a little short. Ideally, it would have been at 24 or 25. So I don't know. We'll see how we go. I think I'll just go for it and hopefully I won't run out of yarn. If I need to, I can do some quicker decreases down this side. I don't think it'd be very noticeable, especially when you're wearing it. It is interesting because this ball was only 100 meters. The yarn's a little bit thicker than the cashmere that's recommended in the pattern, but those ones usually had about 115 to 125 meters recommended. So it makes sense that I might be a little bit short with this one, but hopefully not. I think it's just going to work out perfect. I've just got a feeling like it's going to be a real happy day and everything's going to work out fine. So I'm going to jump back in to the 4th hour of knitting and see how I go. It's the next day and I don't know what it is about knitting, but it makes me so sleepy. So I could only do another hour last night and then I called it. But great progress has been made. This is how far I am through the scarf. I did another 6 and a bit rounds of the repeat. And yeah, there's only a little bit to go. The size of this ball of yarn is troubling me a little bit. I am very scared it's not going to be enough to make it all the way to the end. But we're gonna try. I've been knitting for 5 hours and it feels like a completely acceptable amount of time to get this much work done. I'm really happy with my progress. Like I said, I'm not a very quick knitter, but in terms of this project, I feel like it feels like it's going quick and I'm not getting bored of it yet, which is a really good thing. But the question now is, can I get this done before the 6 hour mark and can I get it done before this ball of yarn runs out? The stakes couldn't be higher and I'm very excited. So is Chewy. It's been 5 hours and 55 minutes and I've run out of yarn. It's so upsetting because I was so close to the end. I think I only had 4 rows to go and it was the I-cord section too. So they were just little tiny, itty bitty tiny little rows. All I needed to do was that much. But I've run out. I have to make a decision. Do I A, go and buy more yarn, or B, do I just sort of finish it off and just have this end be a little bit less long than this one? I don't know. I feel like this is a question for tomorrow, me to answer, because I can't make up my mind. It feels crazy to go to the yarn store and buy a whole other ball of yarn just for maybe like that much of it. It just, seems a little bit extravagant, but I did want to test the pattern out and time it so it was exactly as the pattern is written. So yeah, I'm in 2 minds, but I'm going to decide tomorrow. And I'm going to time the making of the red scarf, just so we know how long the large one takes in comparison to the small one. Also, it'd be fun to see them side by side at the end and see the size difference too. It's the next day and I had a little think about it. And yeah, I think it would be a bit nuts to go to the yarn store and buy a whole new ball of yarn just to use 1/100th of it, finishing off this scarf. So my new plan is, I could bind it off now, but one of my favourite things about this scarf is the first 8 rows where it's just the 2 sections of the I-cord edging without any of the garter stitch in between. I feel like it looks really cute and I really like this end bit, so I would like to be able to have a few more rows of that at the end here. So to do that, I think I might take it back to about here, undo it, and then do one of my decrease rows 1 row early, and I think that might give me just enough yarn to finish it off so I've got a little bit more of that I-cord edging at the very end of my scarf. And that is the small Sophie scarf all finished off. I ended up doing 4 stitches less on the end than I did at the start, just to make sure I had enough yarn. It was just enough, which is lucky, and I honestly feel like you can't tell much of a difference. It's just got a slightly wider triangle to end than the starting point did. But I don't think anyone could tell, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I love the blue. I think the pattern's really good. I think the size is good. I'm gonna have to practice tying how to make it look cute, but I'm really happy with it. I'm really interested to know the difference between the small and the large size. So I thought while my needles are still hot, I'm going to cast on the large size Sophie scarf in this beautiful red. So this yarn's a little bit different. It's a superfine merino. Hopefully I'll have enough yarn this time. It's 125 meters, which I think should be enough for the large, but I'm going to be a little bit more careful about weighing it at the middle point. And if I do think I won't have enough, I'll adjust the pattern slightly in the middle. I was really happy working with my 4mm needles. I love these short little needles. I feel like they're just so comfy to work with. So I'm thinking I'm just going to stick with that. Because I've already done this one, I think this one should be an absolute breeze. The pattern's the same, it just has more stitches and rows in the middle to make it bigger. And for the sake of the video, I'm just going to zoom through making this one. I'll check back in every hour to show you my progress. That way we'll know how long the large one takes in comparison to the small one. Then at the end, I can do a little review and we can see the difference in size between the two, and that'll be fun. Exciting news, I have finished knitting the large version of the Sophie Scarf. This one ended up taking 8 hours and 6 minutes and I love it. I actually ended up going and buying another ball of yarn because when I measured it at the halfway point, I realized I wouldn't have enough to get it all the way finished. So I thought, instead of making this one shorter, I wanted to get it to the full size of the large size. So I just thought I'll buy another ball and it'll be perfect that way. I ended up needing about this much more of the new ball, so it was good that I got one. One of these balls of yarn might have been enough for the small size, but for the large, I definitely needed that extra. The knitting process for this one was exactly the same for the blue one. Although, do you know what happened? I jumped into this one without referencing the pattern again because I was pretty sure I knew exactly what I was doing at the start, and it turns out I forgot what the pattern was a little bit. I actually did my increases a stitch after the stitch I was supposed to do them, so they're just a tiny bit more visible. Normally the increases happen right after the I-cord, so you don't notice them as much. But I don't think it's that noticeable, and also it's kind of one of those mistakes that I don't mind having in a project because it just makes me know that I made it, and yeah, I make mistakes from time to time and that's a-okay. This yarn, being the superfine merino, was a little less forgiving than the alpaca I used in the blue because the alpaca is so fuzzy, you can't really notice if some of the tension on certain rows or stitches is a little bit off. But with the superfine merino, because there's not that fuzziness to hide behind, it's a little bit more obvious. But I think if I washed and blocked this, it would really help it just relax all together and just make it look a tiny bit more neat. So the large one ended up taking 2 hours longer than the small. The small was 6 hours, this one was 8. So let's have a little look at the size difference to see how different the large one looks to the small. So if I put them together at the middle, the size difference between the small and the large doesn't actually look that big. So the blue small one is just a little bit smaller at the middle point than the red one, and at the lengths it's sort of about, I don't know, 5 centimeters shorter on each side. But I'm going to go through some specific measurements for you and compare it to what it says in the pattern. So for the small blue scarf, I was using an alpaca, which is a little bit more bulky, and I was using 4mm needles. So obviously the gauge for this one is a little bit bigger than what the pattern recommended. As a result, the middle point measurement is 12.5 centimeters, whereas in the pattern, the small size suggests that the width of the center will end up being 11 centimeters. So it's just a little bit bigger. The small blue one ended up being 92 centimeters long. And again, the pattern suggested that the length for the small size would be 80 centimeters long. So my blue one actually ended up being 12 centimeters longer than the pattern suggested, which is quite a bit. And I think this does come down to the yarn. So if I'd been using a slightly thinner yarn, this was still an 8-ply, but it's kind of more on the fuzzy side of an 8-ply, but if I'd been using a slightly thinner yarn and the 3.5mm needle suggested in the pattern, it would have ended up quite a bit shorter. So that's something to think about if you're wanting to make a shorter one that maybe you would only want to wrap around once and tie so the ends weren't too long. That's something to think about. And then for the large red scarf, I was using the superfine merino, which is also an 8-ply, but the gauge was slightly different than the alpaca. But at the middle point, it measured 14 centimeters. And the pattern actually suggests that the large size would be 13 centimeters at the middle, so that's a little bit closer. And the length of this red one is 104 centimeters, and the pattern says for the large size, the length should be about 102. So again, because this red is the superfine merino, it did knit up a little bit differently, and it's definitely more in line with the gauge in the pattern. So as a result, my red one is pretty similar in size to the large in the pattern, but my blue one is probably a fair bit bigger than the small in the pattern. I would probably equate the way this worked up to be more like a medium, which the pattern doesn't have, obviously, but yeah, it's not quite the same measurements as the small, but it's still the same amount of stitches and rows as the pattern says. It's just that gauge is just working up a little bit bigger. All right, to sum up, I had an absolute blast making these scarves. I thought it was such a fun pattern. I found the pattern to be really clearly written, and the video instructions on the website were also helpful. I've seen enough TikToks and things like that of people making the scarf that I probably could have figured out the pattern on my own, but I thought I actually wanted to make this specific Sophie scarf pattern just because it's what other people have been doing. And I kind of like it when the knitting community all starts to make the same pattern because it makes you feel like you're part of a gang, and I think that's cool. So because of that, I wanted to buy the official pattern because I wanted to make the official scarf. I feel like the pattern was a really good combination of repetitive elements, but then also elements of additional sort of interest. So the increases and the decreases. I really liked working from the shorter rows at the start and the end up to the longer rows in the middle. I feel like that added a nice sort of element of difference when you were making it. And I feel like in terms of techniques, doing the increases, decreases and I-cord was a nice little treat. Also, it's not often you work in garter stitch, so I thought that looked cute too. In terms of my yarn choices, super happy with that. The alpaca has got such a nice texture and this color is my absolute favorite. I'm just so happy with it. And the superfine merino feels really nice to wear. I think it's going to be a really comfortable one. Also, this is the perfect shade of red for me, so I'm really happy with that too. In terms of pricing, the pattern was I think about $6 Australian. This yarn was $15 for the ball that I used, and this yarn was I think $12 per ball, and I ended up using one full ball and maybe, I don't know, a fifth of the other ball. Because I bought this extra ball of yarn to finish off the large scarf, I've got a whole heap left. So I thought, would it be fun to make two little super small Sophie scarves for my cats so we can all match? I think it would be good. So I'm going to give this project a 10 out of 10. I loved the pattern, I loved knitting them, and I love how they look. I'm definitely going to be making some more in different colours, just because I think they're so great. And in fun news, Petite Knit also have a hood version of the Sophie scarf, which is a lot bigger and has a hood. And I think I should definitely put that on my list of things to make. Probably soon, because I loved it. And that's the end. Thank you for watching. And if you're going to make one, or if you've already made one, let me know in the comments below how you enjoyed it, or will enjoy it, or something. And I'll see you in the next video.